Denzel Washington makes more sense to me on race relations in America than anybody else in Hollywood.
That's a cultural difference. That's not a race difference.
And in an industry that feeds its ego by virtue signaling on racial identity every chance it gets, this is the dose of sanity that Hollywood is not going to like. Subscribe to Elites Exposed for more, and take a look at what he said.
So why did he need a black director? Could a white director not have?
It's not color, it's culture.
Explain the difference, because I think we're in a
Steven
space
Spielberg
right
did Schindler's List.
Mm-hmm.
Martin Scorsese did Goodfellas, right? Steven Spielberg could direct Goodfellas. Martin Scorsese probably could have done a good job with Schindler's List, but they're cultural differences. You know, I know, you know, we all know what it is when a hot comb hits your hair on a Sunday morning, what it smells like. That's a cultural difference, not just a color difference.
Right.
So it's the culture.
You know about a hot comb scenario?
No, she don't know about no hot comb.
Because that's
You don't know.
old school.
You don't know nothing about.
Dax.
See how everybody laugh? That's a cultural difference. That's not a race difference. That's just that motion. That's all I gotta say, right?
You know why that hits hard? Because I can't help but feel like Hollywood at large, and then its critics on the other end, just keep swinging too far between not recognizing the role of race and culture in filmmaking at all, or instead forcing down a kind of racial diversity that's really just skin deep. Isn't that exactly what you saw when the Oscars last year literally announced a whole racial and gender identity checklist in casting and crew that movies had to meet just to qualify for the Best Picture nomination? Is that the kind of diversity Hollywood wants? 30% of film crew from what they call underrepresented groups, and forcing films to cram in these racial quotas even in the main leads, even if it doesn't fit the film's plot or setting? That's where you get disasters like The Little Mermaid, Romeo and Juliet, and Snow White. While films truly representative of the Black American history and experience like Denzel Washington's Fences have to stand out from a sea of this racial tokenism in Hollywood.
Race relationships have to do with race relationships. You're white or whatever you are, I'm black or whatever I am. We're standing here talking now. That's how we get things done. You can't legislate love. The President of the United States can't legislate us into liking each other. We have to step forward and ask questions about each other and engage. There's no law that says, oh, because I'm president, you all got to get along now. So it's up to us.
And there's been so many protests in America, especially during the election. Black Lives Matter movement, for example, and those issues. Has that movement in particular, the Black Lives Matter movement, helped race relations or not in America?
Well, listen, we live in America. And in America, we have the freedom to express ourselves. We shouldn't take that for granted. So whatever the movements are, whether you agree with them or don't, they have the right to express themselves. So that's one of the great things about being in this country, that you do have the right to protest.
Don't you think it is the problem is the racial discrimination?
The right word is not is, was.
Was.
And that's not the only problem. That's one of the problems. Now, you can make it the only one if you'd like, but it's not the only one. But that's a fact. That's a fact. They couldn't play basketball in the NBA. Well, their grandfathers couldn't walk on the sidewalk, or they were slaves. So each generation is trying to do better for the next generation.
And frankly, Denzel Washington is one of only a handful of black actors we have today that have lived and thrived in Hollywood long enough to witness how the civil rights movement impacted black representation in the movie business. And when you've developed a context that broad, you start to see patterns that others don't see because they've zoomed in too much in the moment. I mean, imagine an acting juggernaut like Denzel Washington if he had to break out today. He'd be thrust into the spotlight by a producer that simply wanted to tick off a checklist on his diversity pitch for the Oscars. What an absolute injustice it would be to the great substance he brings because of his culture rather than just his skin color. Because I think you realize how implicitly condescending it is to look at a black actor and just see him as the same color as a racial collective and then want to give him a nudge forward on that basis. That's the bigotry of low expectations that you see from modern woke Hollywood. And that's exactly the kind of implicit racism that Denzel Washington is best placed to fight. Color is skin deep, but culture is not. Culture is the weight of past centuries and the stories of your ancestors pressing down on you. It gives a filmmaker a kind of eye for detail and nuance that others just don't have. And that's what makes a film like Fences tell a story that resonates so deeply with the entire country, not just a community. I think it's a culmination of actors like Denzel that have lived through an evolution of race relations in Hollywood that cannot simply become an empty virtue-signaling talking point.
You hear often that black actors, black movies don't play well overseas. Is that the truth, or is that an excuse?
I've heard everything. And what I hear keeps changing. Because they used to say it didn't sell over here. Then it does. Then it said it doesn't sell in the South. Then it does. Well, it doesn't sell in Europe. Then it does. So I just keep pushing. Well, what an opportunity I have to prove them wrong. I've been the guy at the Oscars without my name being called. I've been the guy at the Oscars when my name is called. I've been the guy at the Oscars when everybody thought they was gonna call my name and they didn't. So I've lived it.
So what would you say to the people who are looking at this process and saying it's unfair?
Yeah, and so what? You gonna give up? If you're looking for an excuse, you'll find one.
In race.
You can find it wherever you like. You can't live like that. You just do the best you can do.
What an absolute class act Denzel is for this. Because remember, it's easy for the modern identity-obsessed culture to dismiss this truth if it wasn't Denzel Washington saying that as a proud Black American. He's come from within the African-American people, lived through the most transformative era for race relations in the country, and then became one of the era-defining actors of his generation. You don't do that with the mindset of a victim. And that's the lesson he has for the Black Americans of this country at large.
Do you think we've made any headway in the
I think it's more important to make headway in our own house. By the time the system comes into play, the damage is done. They're not locking up 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
You know, I was in Chicago a couple of 3-4 weeks ago, and we saw these little kids on bikes with masks on the side of their head, like 5 or 6 of them. And the driver said, yeah, they're little yummies. I said, who? He said, little yummies. Look up, Google Lil Yummy. Lil Yummy was an 11-year-old murderer.
Wow.
And you look at his picture, you'll see the headshot of him, and he's like this. And he got murdered at 11 by a 14-year-old.
Wow.
Who's doing life now, and a 16-year-old.
It makes no sense.
You blame the system? Where was his father? It starts in the house. It starts in the home. And yeah, well, my father got locked up. Well, where was his father?
Yeah.
You know, like I did talk about my 3 closest friends, and they did, 15 to 25, one did 28, this and that. I was the only one of the 3 that had a father in my life, even though my parents were together, but I still had a father who was a gentle man and a good example, and they didn't. We can blame the system if we want, but they didn't lock any of us up at 7.
Yeah.
We were all doing enough to get locked up at 13. My parents sent me in another direction. They didn't have anybody to help them, and they kept doing what they was doing, and the system got them. So I don't, the system is rigged, but why, all the more reason not to help it.
Now remember, Denzel Washington is a first-hand witness to that. Because today, nearly half of Black American children grow up in a single-parent household without a dad in the house. But Denzel's father was a respected pastor who made sure Denzel never felt the lack of a masculine father figure in his life, while his mother went out of her way to work multiple jobs in her life to make sure he would stay off the streets and get a proper education. And I think there's no better result his parents could have asked for than a son like Denzel Washington. But let me know in the comments what you think about him, and subscribe to Elites Exposed to join the conversation.